Have you ever wondered what would happen if by a simple detour you left the path of the world you know and entered a place where the rules no longer follow logic? Neither did I. Until that day, it was supposed to be just an ordinary trip, just another one among many. I was driving along Route 66 as I had done before when my GPS froze in the middle of nowhere, and a man at an old gas station, the kind that seems forgotten in time, suggested a shortcut. He said it was faster, quieter, almost no traffic. And lo and behold, he wasn't wrong. The road was completely empty, no trucks, no signs, endless. At first, it seemed like a relief, the kind of straight, silent road that invites you to think about life as the white lines pass under your tires. But then the weather began to change. The sky lightened and darkened as if it had a life of its own. The radio began to crackle even though it was off, and the landscape, though different, seemed to repeat the same patterns, the same trees, the same broken fence, the same crow on the fence. That's when I saw the sign, Retro Sunset Inn, vacancy. It looked like a mirage, a retro motel, the kind you only see in old movies, neon lights glowing perfectly. The facade was too well preserved to be out there in the middle of nowhere, but what made me stop wasn't the look, it was the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels too full. From the moment I parked my car in that immaculate yard, something inside me whispered that I shouldn't be there, and yet something bigger kept pulling me forward, as if I'd been there before, as if this place had waited for me for far too long. The receptionist called me by name before I could say anything. The key was already on the counter, room 3, the same number I used to choose out of superstition when I traveled. And when I walked into the room, the impression was immediate. Everything there seemed custom-made. The bed was exactly the size I like. The temperature was ideal. The smell, it was the same as the soap my grandmother used, but I never told anyone that. No one was supposed to know. Have you ever had that feeling that everything around you is too right, as if it weren't coincidence but intention? As if every detail had been carefully placed there to make you feel at ease and forget the reason you came there in the first place. What you'll discover now may surprise you, because the Retro Sunset Inn isn't just an off-the-beaten-path motel. It's a place where time bends, where exits lead back to the entrance, and where friendly smiles hide more than you might imagine. Stay with me, because everything that happened after completely changed what I understand by reality. And the strangest thing of all is that, even with so many signs telling me to run away, some part of me wanted to stay, not for comfort, but because of that silent curiosity that lives within us, the one that whispers, what if it's just a coincidence? What if you're exaggerating? But deep down, we know when it's not an exaggeration. We feel it, even if we can't explain it. If this kind of feeling has ever crossed your mind, that feeling of being in a place where everything seems overly rehearsed, leave a comment. Tell me what's touched you most so far, or if you've ever experienced something similar. Because when we share, others who feel this way also find the courage to speak up. And sometimes that alone changes everything. By the way, if this kind of story captivates you the way it captivated me when I lived or relived this experience, click the like button. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it's what shows that this content is worth sharing. And if you want to continue diving with me into places that seem too real to be false, subscribe to the channel. It's your presence here that keeps all this alive, active, and making sense to more people who feel the world breaking down a little from time to time. Because deep down, we know some routes don't appear on the map, but they exist, and the Retro Sunset Inn is just the beginning. My name is Michael Harper. I'm 34 years old. I work in industrial equipment logistics, and I spend a good portion of my days crisscrossing the American countryside. I was on another one of those trips along Route 66, the old highway that passes through deserts, forgotten diners, and towns that seem frozen in time. This time, my destination was Barstow, California. I left Kingman, Arizona, early in the morning, hoping to arrive before sunset, and everything would have been fine had I not taken the advice of a complete stranger. Halfway there, I stopped at a small, isolated gas station, one of those with barely 2 attendants and selling paper maps that no one uses anymore. It was early afternoon, and the sky was already beginning to change. A dry heat made the asphalt vibrate, and a line of stopped trucks indicated an accident ahead on the main road. While filling up, I told the attendant that it would take a while to get to Barstow like this. That's when he made the kind of suggestion that sounds more like a test of fate than a travel tip. There's an old road that cuts through the interior. Almost no one uses it. It avoids all this traffic. It's quieter, more direct. He traced the route with his finger on a greasy piece of paper on the counter. He told me to just take exit 239 and ignore the interrupted road sign, that I'd be back on the main road in less than an hour. And I, with that mixture of haste and naivete, typical of someone who's driven a lot and thinks they know the road well enough, accepted. I only realized I'd made a bad choice when my cell phone signal completely disappeared and the GPS started blinking. But even without a connection, the map still loaded the route. The screen showed a straight line, without curves, surrounded by nothing but desert and small rock formations. The first few miles were normal. No traffic, no noise. It even seemed promising. But after 20 minutes, the environment began to feel different. I can't explain it. The silence stopped being reassuring and became densely artificial. There was no wind, not a single animal, and the landscape seemed to repeat itself, as if I were driving through a pre-programmed scenario with recycled elements. You know when you pass by a place and have the strange feeling that you've seen that same crooked tree, that same rusty fence, that same patch of crumbling gravel minutes before. I chuckled to myself, thinking I was just tired, but then I noticed the mile marker on the dashboard kept climbing, and still nothing new appeared. It was at that moment that the GPS, still insisting on working, froze. The arrow indicated I was going in no direction, a nameless road, no town nearby, no landmarks, a digital void, but perfectly real. And just as I was starting to consider turning around, that sign I'll never forget appeared ahead. Retro Sunset Inn. Vacancy. The neon pulsed with a soft, almost hypnotic amber color, the kind of light that seems alive, that seems to call your name even without making a sound. The entrance was flanked by palm trees, too symmetrical to be natural. And the building, oh, the building. A 2-story structure with wrought iron balconies, open red curtains, and a facade that looked freshly painted. It glowed in the setting sun as if it had just been inaugurated. The doubt lasted only a few seconds. Part of me knew that place shouldn't be there, that it was too good to be true. But when you're alone in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a silence that seems to have a personality, the survival instinct merges with the impulse of curiosity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what I found inside wasn't just a warm welcome or a comfortable room. What I found was the beginning of a distortion, a tipping point where time, space, and identity began to blur. A portal disguised as convenience, a setting designed to seem familiar, but which slowly reveals the truth hidden behind the perfect facade. And the strangest thing is that, to this day, when I close my eyes, I can smell the air in that place, a mix of old lavender and new nail polish, as if someone wanted to convince me I was safe, when in fact everything was already happening without me realizing it. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. If this all resonates with something you feel when you remember decisions that changed your path without warning. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was exactly after I passed the Retro Sunset Inn sign that everything began to fall apart, as if the road I was on no longer belonged to the map that had brought me there. The sky, previously clear, began to darken in a matter of minutes, but without clouds, without a storm. It was as if the light itself was being slowly, quietly turned off. Have you ever seen the world change colors for no apparent reason? It's not like a sunset or a cloud shadow, it's something else. A silent shift in reality. On the road, the horizon seemed motionless. Driving became automatic, hypnotic. No matter how much I accelerated or slowed down, the surrounding landscape didn't change. I began to notice small recurring patterns. The same reduced speed sign, the same tree bent over to the left, the same fallen branch to the right. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but when I saw the same oil stain on the asphalt for the third time, I knew something was wrong with this road. That's when I looked at the dashboard and saw the time wasn't right. I'd driven for almost an hour since the gas station, but the car clock showed the same time I'd left. 2:36 p.m. I looked at my phone. No signal, no time, black screen. I restarted. Nothing. A chill began to grow in my chest. A kind of sensation that has nothing to do with ordinary fear, but with a distorted perception. When time and space are no longer part of your guaranteed possessions, your body understands before your mind. The road narrowed. The asphalt looked freshly paved, but unmarked by paint. And then, finally, the outline of the motel appeared on the horizon. A symmetrical two-story building with a neon sign in soft orange. Retro Sunset Inn. Vacancy. But what caught my attention wasn't the name. It was the condition of the place. It was perfect, impeccable, as if no one had ever stopped there, or as if everything had. Not a crack in the sidewalk, not a cobweb in the corners. The clean windows reflected the grey sky with unreal clarity. I parked the car in a perfectly central spot. As I got out, I noticed the air seemed lighter, but not in a good way. It was as if it had been filtered. No gasoline smell, no dust, no normal desert heat. An artificial, almost sterile atmosphere. The kind you experience in hospitals or large research centers. The wind died down. The sounds disappeared. Only me and that place were left. I walked to the reception desk. A smiling woman greeted me with exaggerated friendliness. She wore an old but impeccable uniform. Her name was embroidered on the chest, Lucy. She looked at me and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Harper." Frozen. I couldn't answer. I just nodded and accepted the room key. Number 3. Always 3. The number that stuck with me since I was a child, when I thought it was my lucky number. I didn't question how she knew my name. I didn't ask how she knew I was coming. My body just reacted. I took the key, thanked her with a nervous smile, and headed down the side hallway. The motel's exterior walls were varnished wood. The texture gleamed under the neon light, as if waxed just minutes before. Every detail seemed carefully planned. The doorknob turned without resistance. The door swung open smoothly, and the room, it was any traveler's dream room. Huge bed, white bedspread, clean carpet, neatly lined curtains. Everything in place, impeccable. But that was what bothered me. Nothing was out of place. I lay down instinctively. The mattress molded to my body as if it knew me. And in that instant, I understood that there was a subtle but profound difference between what is inherently perfect and what is too perfect to be true. I closed my eyes for a few minutes, or maybe hours. When I opened them again, the light was still the same. The bedside clock read 11:11. I checked my cell phone. No signal. The television turned on by itself. A black and white channel playing an old movie, people dancing and smiling as if forever trapped in a 1950s commercial. I tried changing the channel. They all showed the same image, people who were too happy, staring eyes, a static face, a smile that wouldn't fade. I got up and went to the window. Outside, the same cars were still parked, same models, same colors, same license plates. There was no sound, no movement, no wind. It was like looking at a photograph in real time, as if the world had been paused or replaced by something that only seemed real. I sat on the edge of the bed. I tried to remember the last sound I'd heard on that road. I couldn't. I tried to remember the way back. It wasn't coming. As if, upon crossing that sign, something in me had been disconnected from the original path. as if I'd become part of the background of a false reality, a dimension carefully crafted to receive me, like a character in a script written by someone who knows me better than I know myself. Write down, "This makes sense to me," if at any point in this story you felt that twinge of familiarity that we don't know where it comes from, but that insists on accompanying us on the strangest curves of the journey. Everything at the retro Sunset Inn looked like something out of an old catalogue, but dustless, unworn, as if time had stood still there. The reception area was panelled in gleaming wood, and the bell on the counter was ringing before I even stepped inside. A blonde woman with a wide smile and a starched uniform appeared out of nowhere. "Welcome back, Mr. Harper." I hadn't given my name, I hadn't made a reservation, and yet she handed me a key, the heavy metal kind with a red and gold charm marking Room 3. The way she said my name was like someone repeating something over and over with a familiarity, as if we were in the middle of an old routine. It was a rehearsed line. I could feel it, but her voice had such a calculated sweetness that it was hard to tell if there was danger there or just a well-staged performance. "You're right on time," she added, winking, and then turned away as if it were a common greeting. The hallway leading to the rooms was carpeted too soft for a roadside motel. The lighting was amber, pleasant, but somehow staged. The frames on the walls displayed pictures of happy couples, smiling children, and travelers resting. But none of the photos were dated, and the faces, if you stared for more than 3 seconds, began to look too similar, as if they were versions of the same person at different ages, the kind of detail we only notice when our brain slows down from its rush. On the way, I noticed there were cars in the parking lot, yes, at least 8 or 9. All clean, well parked, but no sound, no movement in the windows, no lights on other than my own. I began to walk more slowly. I listened to the sounds, or lack thereof, not even the creaking of wood, the sound of footsteps, nothing. It was as if my body were the only one making noise there, and everything else just waiting. When I turned the key to room 3, the latch released with a soft click. The door swung open as if it had been lubricated just minutes earlier. The room was lit by a corner lamp. Low light, pastel walls, a white bedspread folded with military precision. On the nightstand, a tray held a glass already filled with water, and a handwritten note. "We know the desert is tiring. You arrived safely." That stopped me for a few seconds. There was air conditioning, but the air seemed filtered. No odor, no humidity, no trace of use. The television was already on, showing a scene of 2 men playing cards in silence. Black and white, no speech, just instrumental elevator music playing in the background. It was like entering a space built just for a specific person, as if every choice had been made based on preferences I didn't even remember having. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything. I touched the sheet, pure cotton, cool, fresh. I suddenly remembered that as a child, at my great-aunt's house in Santa Fe, I'd slept in a bed made of exactly this kind of fabric. The smell, the texture, everything. But I'd never told anyone about it. Never. It was too small a memory to be part of a conversation, but now it was there, materialized. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside, there was no Bible, no manual, no phone, just a card. "If you forget why you're here, close your eyes. We'll help you." Remember, I read it more than once. The handwriting was beautiful, round, like a primary school teacher's. But there was no signature, no logo, no anything. I went to the window. I pulled back the curtain. Outside, the cars were still parked, in exactly the same positions. And now, with the light from the room casting my reflection on the glass, I realized that the shadow behind me wasn't just mine. I turned around on impulse. The room was empty. I looked again. The shadow was gone. I closed the curtain. I went back to bed. The TV was still on the same channel. The 2 men were still playing cards. They hadn't changed positions. The glass of water was still full. I decided to lie down. Not because I was tired, but because it was as if the room was waiting for me to do so. It was like a play that needed to follow the script, to avoid failure. And as soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard the first voice. It wasn't on the TV or in the hallway. It was inside the room, a whisper, but with a clear intonation, crisp. It simply said, "It's calmer now." I sat bolt upright. The room, the same, untouched. No source for that voice, but my heartbeat was racing, the kind of acceleration that comes when your body wants to run, but your mind is still trying to rationalize. I took a deep breath. I turned on the overhead light. Nothing happened. Only the lamp stayed on. The switch blinked as if it were trying to obey, but something was blocking the command. I went to the door. I locked it again. I checked the latch 3 times. I went back to bed. On the small table next to the glass, there was now a small folded sheet of paper. I knew it hadn't been there before. I unfolded it carefully. It was a simple note. "The exit only appears to those who forget they're trying to leave." I felt a chill run down my spine. The words vibrated within me with a twisted logic. Was it an instruction? A warning? An irony? Comment below. This seems written for me, if at any point in this story you ever felt that something was trying to lead you to a place that you didn't choose, but that seemed to know everything about you. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because that first night at the Retro Sunset Inn seemed designed to disarm me. The room was incredibly cozy, and that's not a compliment. It was as if the ambience had been crafted based on an emotional memory of mine, the kind that stays tucked away in the most hidden corners of my mind. The scent in the air wasn't just pleasant, it was familiar. Lavender with something slightly sweet, perhaps vanilla, that reminded me of childhood vacations at my grandmother's house. The kind of detail you only notice when you realize it was chosen intentionally. The blanket was just the right amount of weight. The amber light reflected off the walls as if someone had calibrated the brightness to induce relaxation. The television, which I'd left on out of habit, continued playing an old black and white movie. Couples dancing in ballrooms that looked like sets from a 1950s commercial. The audio was crystal clear, no background noise, no hiss. And when I switched channels, they all showed something similar, different scenes, but with the same tone. Static smiles, exaggerated joy, perfect cuts. Nothing felt authentic. Everything was too comfortable. At some point, I dropped the remote control and closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep immediately, but I didn't wake up either. It was a state of suspended consciousness, where you know your body is there, but your mind begins to drift. The silence that pervaded the room was different. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was as if the air had been purposefully stilled. No crickets, no rustling of leaves, no mechanical sounds from the refrigerator or plumbing. Nothing, not even the sound of my own breathing, seemed to echo off the walls. I'd stayed in enough cheap motels to know there was always noise. Always. In the middle of nowhere. But here, the complete absence of any sound became a sound in itself. An invisible hum that seemed to pulse behind the walls, under the carpet, inside the light fixtures. A few hours passed, or maybe minutes. It's hard to measure time when time there doesn't seem to follow the same rules as before. The digital clock on the nightstand still read 11:11. The screen didn't blink. The light intensity didn't vary. It was as if everything was frozen, until I heard a laugh, faint, slurred. But it wasn't in the room. It was coming from the hallway, that dry, distant laugh, conveying not humor but tension, the sound of something pretending to laugh. I sat up immediately. I waited. I tried to convince myself it was the television, but the image continued on the same loop of a couple gyrating in a ballroom, and the volume was turned down to a minimum. I got out of bed. I went to the door. I put my ear to it. Nothing. The silence had returned. And right then, in that complete absence, I began to notice the presence, because the scariest thing of all wasn't the laughter itself. It was what came after, the feeling that I was no longer alone. I slowly returned to bed, my body stiff, as if each step triggered an internal alarm. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at the lamp, and it was at that moment, in that micro moment between two thoughts, that the bulb flickered. A blink, fast, isolated, but enough to reveal for a split second a shadow in the opposite corner of the room. It wasn't a shadow cast by me. It didn't move with the light. It was still like a permanent mark of the room, only revealed when the lighting failed. I stood completely still. I stared. The shadow was gone. I stood up. I touched the wall where it had been. Nothing, no mark, no sound, no explanation. I took a deep breath. I lay back down. I kept my eyes open for a while, staring at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly, but made no noise. My thoughts began to mix with the images I saw on TV. It was as if it were being used to align my mind with a specific frequency, a process of reconditioning, as if the place was observing me and, at the same time, adjusting me. You know when you walk into a room and feel like you're being scanned, even without visible cameras? That's what it felt like. Everything was too precise to be coincidence. The room wasn't just accommodating me, it was studying me. My every gesture seemed to respond to a script, as if, with each action, the environment calibrated something. Temperature, lighting, soundtrack, even the small stimuli coming from the invisible sounds around me. I got up for the last time that night. I went to the bathroom mirror and stared at myself. My expression was normal. Tired, yes, but nothing out of the ordinary. And yet I had the impression that, in the reflection, my eyes were calmer than I actually felt. Not apathetic, not scared, but too calm, as if someone were watching over me. I returned to my room. I turned off the lamp. Darkness was immediate, a kind of darkness that swallows everything, even the outlines of objects. I closed my eyes. I don't remember the exact moment I fell asleep, but I remember the dream. I was in the same room, but there were 3 doors. One led back to the hallway, another opened onto a garden I'd never seen, and the third was locked. Behind it, voices, whispers that spoke incoherent sentences, things like, "Now he's adjusting. We're almost ready. It's not time to leave." Yet, and in the dream, I tried to force open that door. I tried to scream, but my voice came out muffled, as if the air around me was being sucked in by something. I woke up with the feeling that someone had just left the room. The curtain swayed slightly, but the window remained locked. The TV was off. The clock still read 11:11. Comment: this calm is too noisy. If you've also noticed that sometimes what scares you most is not the chaos, but the silence that comes before it. It was the next morning that something inside me began to struggle against logic. After an uncomfortably perfect night, I woke up with a strange lightness in my body, as if I hadn't slept, but also wasn't tired. I drank coffee that was already served at the reception desk. And yes, just the way I used to have it when I lived with my mother, unsweetened, very strong, and with that bitter aftertaste you only find when someone truly knows your taste. It didn't calm me down. On the contrary, it made me restless. The check-in clerk wasn't even there. Instead, a tall black man with very light eyes smiled and said, "I hope you rested well, Mr. Harper. Come back whenever you like." I didn't remember telling him my name either. I just nodded, a little awkwardly, as if my head was still processing it all. I packed my things and got back in the car. The tank was full. I remember this because I made a point of filling up before hitting the road back in Kingman. I plugged Barstow's address back into the GPS, and even without an internet connection, the route was still plotted, with an estimated arrival time and everything. The sky was clear, no clouds, no wind, just dry heat and that static silence that seems to stick to the windshield. I drove for over 40 minutes in a straight line. No signs, no forks, and most importantly, without passing any other cars. The landscape seemed frozen in time. Every curve in the desert had the same type of rock, the same leaning cactus, the same wind-bent shrub, until I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Up ahead, the familiar neon sign, Retro Sunset Inn, vacancy. I thought it was a different location, or a mistake, but the sign was the same. The lights blinked in the same pattern, the parking lot with the same cars. Even the blue pickup truck with the cracked window I'd noticed the night before was still there, and worse, in the same spot. I glanced at the dashboard. The gas hadn't gone down. Even though I'd driven for 40 minutes, the marker was exactly where I'd left it when I left the motel. That stopped me. I got out of the car, looked around. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I tried to reset it. Nothing. The car clock didn't move either. The time was the same as when I'd left the parking lot. I know it sounds impossible, but in that moment, time seemed to have collapsed in on itself. A feeling of invisible imprisonment began to spread through my chest. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to rationalize. I must have made a U-turn without realizing it, or followed some curve that brought me back. But the road was straight, and I paid attention to every mile, every bush, every curve. I drove around the block, if you can call it that, around the motel. Everything was the same, exactly the same as the night before. Not a leaf out of place, not a tire track that wasn't mine. I got back to the car. I started the engine. I backed up. I drove forward. The same feeling, a closed cycle, as if the road were pushing me back to that place. And I was overcome. I don't know if it was logic trying to find a foothold or pure mental exhaustion, but I turned back. I parked. I went in. The same receptionist from the first night was back. "I'm glad you decided to stay a little longer," she said, but the smile was different. Not because it had changed, but because it was too identical to the night before. The same expression, the same slightly spaced teeth, the same way of blinking, as if she were watching a loop of a recording. I tried to ask a question. She just held out the key to room 3 again, without looking at the screen, without typing anything. And there I was, with the same key in my hand, as if I'd never left. I climbed the stairs slowly, my knees stiff, my stomach churning. When I opened the bedroom door, the air smelled the same. The pillows were in the same position. The TV was off, but with the same movie paused at the exact second I'd left off the night before. That was no coincidence. It was a meticulously designed repetition, and this realization made me feel as if I'd passed through some kind of veil, an invisible membrane that separates what we call reality from what lies beyond. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just trapped in a physical place. I was trapped inside a version of reality where the rules didn't apply, where time and space obeyed something else, something older, deeper, more intelligent, and crueler. Comment below. That makes sense to me. If at some point this feeling of spinning in place has also touched you, now I want to delve even deeper into this, because the feeling of déjà vu that set in that morning was unlike any other I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just familiarity. It was a meticulous, almost cynical repetition. Everything was in the same place and exactly the same way. When I opened the door to room 3, the same sweet aroma hung in the air, the bedspread perfectly straightened, as if no one had ever lain there. The morning light streamed in through the same crack in the curtains and fell on the same spot on the carpet, with the same intensity. And what made me freeze for a few seconds was the digital clock on the dresser. It read 11:11, not 11:10 turning, not 11:12 approaching. It was 11:11, and the screen seemed motionless, like a frozen image. A minute passed, 2, and nothing changed. But as soon as I took my eyes off it, the hand jumped to 11:12, as if it were merely waiting. I got up, my body still, heavy, as if I'd slept for over 12 hours, and went to the reception desk, pretending to ask for directions to the highway. And there he was, the same attendant, with the same fixed smile and impeccable posture, like an actor reliving a rehearsed scene. "Good morning, Mr. Harper. Did you sleep well?" He used the exact same words he'd spoken the day before. Even the pauses between sentences seemed identical. His mug, next to the old monitor, was positioned at the same angle, with the same lipstick stain on the rim. When I asked about the road, he gave the same answer, with the same intonation, as if stuck in a script. I left with a growing unease. It wasn't a coincidence. This was a performance, a carefully orchestrated replay. I thought maybe I was just too tired, stressed, and that my mind was projecting these similarities. But as I walked down the hallway toward the parking lot, I heard that sound again. Muffled laughter, as if someone were laughing behind the walls. But there was no one. I looked out the window of the next room and saw someone approaching the door of room 4, a man in a plaid shirt, grey hair, and a backpack. He looked lost, as if he'd just arrived, just like I had. And then I noticed another detail. His car was identical to mine. Not the same model, identical. Same scratch on the passenger door, same bumper sticker. When he turned for a moment, I felt like I was looking at a distorted version of myself. That repetition wasn't just of objects or gestures, it was of stories. The structure of that place was reproducing behaviors, decisions, even faces. Back in my room, I turned on the television, hoping to find something different. But every channel showed the same old movies, and in one of them, a character was driving along Route 66 and checking into a motel with a pink neon sign. The name was the same, Retro Sunset Inn, and the room in the scene was identical to the one I was in. The camera filmed from an angle almost identical to the one I saw from the bed, as if the film were watching me, or as if I were part of it. I tried to chat with other guests. A woman with her hair up and a floral dress smiled as I approached. "Are you here today too?" she asked. But there was something in her eyes, as if there was nothing behind those pupils, just a script. I asked if she knew how to get out of there, and she laughed. Funny, my husband said the same thing yesterday. When I asked where her husband was, she pointed to the window. He went to get a map. I looked outside, and there was a man standing there, staring at the motel sign, the same posture I'd adopted when I arrived, and for a moment his image flickered, like a reflection in a puddle. It was as if time had folded in on itself, as if I was stuck in a loop where my every action was mirrored by another guest, or perhaps by another version of myself. I tried to leave again, walking down the road, but every turn brought me back to the parking lot. And each time I returned, the clock still read 11:11. People frozen in their roles greeted me as if it were the first time, and every time I entered the room, the television turned on by itself. The same movie, the same dialogue, as if the motel was studying me, recording my reactions, testing my limits. It stopped being just strange. It began to feel personal. A manipulation that defied logic, physics, and the very nature of reality. And the only thing that seemed to escape this cycle was my awareness that I was trapped. But even that began to fade. There was a moment when I found myself responding to the attendant before he even spoke, as if I already knew what was coming, as if I were becoming part of the machine. I began to wonder, what if I'd been through this before? What if each escape attempt was just another repetition, an illusion of freedom created to keep the game going? I could no longer trust time. The digital clock beside my bed insisted on 11:11 every time I woke, as if trapped in an unbreakable cycle. And even when I got up, showered, left the room and walked around the motel, it was as if the world around me was on hold. A permanent pause between two realities. I decided to test the limits of this place. I pocketed the room key, descended the porch steps, and walked to the road. This time, I didn't take the car. I walked aimlessly, ignoring the asphalt and cutting through the dry desert around the Retro Sunset Inn. The heat was stifling, but I felt an urgency more intense than the blazing sun. There was something out there. I had to find it. I walked for over an hour, leaving the motel structure behind until I could no longer see it. But when I climbed a small sandy hill and prepared to look at the road ahead, my stomach dropped. There was the sign, the same facade, the same colorful neon sign blinking slowly. The motel was in front of me again. I entered from the same side I'd left. It was as if I'd circled a spherical world and returned to my starting point, even without changing direction. I tried something else. I got in the car, turned the key in the ignition, turned on the GPS, and sped down the road, this time without stopping. I ignored every fork in the road and continued straight ahead, determined to find any other form of civilization. When the GPS signals started to fail, I focused solely on the horizon. I didn't stop for anything, but after maybe 30 or 40 minutes, the dashboard showed the same number of miles. Driven, there it was again. Retro Sunset Inn, vacancy. I pulled over to the side of the road, got out and looked around. This wasn't possible. I should have been in another city by now, maybe even outside of Arizona. But there was the sign, with the same weathered paint, the same faded colors, the same soft movement of the curtains behind the windows. I returned to the lobby. The attendant smiled. He said nothing. He just slid the key to room 3 toward me. I decided to test the limits of the physical structure. I ran out the back door and made my way through an area of low vegetation. I crossed fences, jumped over small rocks, and scraped my arms on dry bushes. When I stopped to catch my breath and turn around, I saw the same windows decorated with red curtains and the same neon sign beckoning me. I had left through the back, but returned through the front. I did even more. I picked up a rock from the garden and threw it hard against one of the windows in the neighboring room. The glass should have shattered on impact, but the rock simply hit and bounced as if the surface were made of rubber. I tried forcing doors, climbing rooftops, using a compass to find direction. The needle spun endlessly. No north, no logic. I started jotting things down on a pad of paper. Dates, times, what I ate, what I listened to. And every day, or what I thought was a new day, everything was the same. The same music came from the TV in the lobby, the same pine scent in the hallway, the same non-existent wind blew through the cracks in the balcony. In a moment of desperation, I tried to speak to another guest. A bald man in a plaid shirt. He'd been reading a newspaper in the courtyard since day one. I approached and asked, "Do you know how to get out of here?" He looked at me, blinked slowly, and said, "I just arrived." But he was holding the same folded newspaper from the previous morning, the same coffee still steaming in the white cup, the same fly perched on the same corner of the table. The feeling of being trapped wasn't just spatial anymore, it was mental, a kind of prison that messed with my perception of time, reality, and even identity. I began to wonder if I was truly the same every time I woke up, or if there were versions of me coexisting in that space, all believing they were in control. Perhaps each escape attempt created a new layer, a new iteration of myself, looping with small variations I couldn't detect. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it was at this point that I began to realize that the Retro Sunset Inn wasn't just a place I was. It was a place that was inside me. Comment, I'm on this journey too. I want to know if this makes sense to you, because the feeling of repetition, of invisible imprisonment, is more real than we imagine. The breakfast lights at the Retro Sunset Inn always glowed the same orange, as if trapped in a filter of eternity. Everything was always impeccable. The muffins never stale. The orange juice never lost its freshness. And the old radio in the corner played the same sequence of songs, 50s hits that repeated like a broken record. The third morning I woke up at 11:11 and went downstairs. I found someone different there. An older man, wearing a slightly worn brown suit jacket and scuffed leather shoes, sat alone at one of the tables in the back, with a half-empty cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on me, as if he knew exactly what I was about to ask. He gave me a subtle nod, inviting me to sit. "You fell for it too, didn't you?" he said, his voice hoarse, marked by the dust of many roads and few explanations. "You're not the first, and if you stay here, you won't be the last." It took me a moment to respond. It was the first time anyone in that place had truly seemed present. The staff, with their frozen smiles, seemed to merely be replicating programmed actions. The other guests, always the same faces, repeating similar dialogue like poorly written supporting characters, never showed any sign of real awareness. "How long have you been here?" I asked, trying not to sound desperate. He took a deep breath, looked out the window, as if trying to calculate something impossible. 14 days, I think. But I used to think it was 7, or maybe 30. The truth is, time here isn't a line. It's a circle, sometimes a maze. I remained silent. It was exactly what I'd been feeling. But until that moment, there was no one to validate that feeling, or madness. Did you try to leave? I asked. Sure, by car, on foot. I even tried walking through the woods behind the motel with a rope tied around my waist, like those cave explorers. Before I knew it, the rope was just wrapping around me. We always come back here, no matter which path we choose. He paused, and his gaze grew heavier. The worst part, kid, isn't getting stuck. It's starting to forget. Forgetting what you used to do, where you lived, your mother's name, your dog's name, even your own face in the mirror starts to look strange. My stomach churned, because almost unconsciously I was already experiencing this. I couldn't remember the last phone call I'd made, what exactly I was going to Barstow to do, my ex-girlfriend's last name. And, worse, I'd already looked in the bathroom mirror with a strange feeling, as if my expression took milliseconds longer to react to what I was doing. "Why are you still here?" I asked. He gave a tired smile. "Because sometimes it's easier to accept prison than to keep banging on bars." That's when I realized he wasn't just stuck in the place. He was already a part of it. There was something about his presence, the way his eyes didn't blink often, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, always in time. That made me think he was slowly being absorbed, dissolved into that pretense of ideal American hospitality. When I got up from the table, he said nothing more. He just looked at me with an expression that mixed pity, warning, and resignation. I returned to room 3 with the feeling that I had crossed an invisible border. I was no longer a confused traveler. Now, I was a conscious prisoner, and knowing this changed everything, or perhaps nothing. As I passed the reception desk, I noticed the attendant wasn't there. For the first time, the counter was empty, but the bell, that small, shiny brass sphere, seemed to glow brighter than before, as if inviting me to press it, to trigger something. I didn't press. I kept walking. I walked down the hall, no longer listening for footsteps or voices. The walls seemed narrower, the carpet darker, the air thicker. When I closed the door behind me, silence enveloped me again, thick as a smokescreen. I turned on the TV, the same old movie, but this time the characters were looking straight at the camera, straight at me. For the first time, I hung up. I lay down on the bed and stayed there, thinking, mentally reviewing every childhood memory, as if to hold on to the last threads of my identity before the room sucked the rest away. And it was at that point that I realized what kept me there wasn't just a curse or a parallel dimension. It was an invisible choice I might already have made, a subtle acceptance of something that felt more comfortable than reality. The motel was a courtesy prison, a cotton prison, and perhaps that was the deepest danger, comfortable oblivion. The idea that all of this might have a deeper purpose began to grow within me like a slow poison. Until that moment, I'd been stuck in a pattern of trying to escape at any cost. But that man's words resonated differently now. It wasn't just a warning, it was almost a confession. Something like, if you're still fighting, it's because you still remember there's an outside. And I still remembered. I remembered my sister's name, the taste of the strong coffee from the Kingman diner, the sound of my phone vibrating in the glove compartment. But all of that was becoming blurry, like a memory. You know you have, but can't quite pull out. And it was in this limbo that something new happened. Behind the counter, as I pretended to ask the clerk for directions, the same one with the same smile, the same intonation, the same words, my eye caught a spiral of notes thrown near a filing cabinet. They were deliberately hidden from view, but they weren't locked either. One of them caught my eye because it had my name scrawled at the top. Michael Harper, note, resistant behavior. It was the first time I'd seen my name in that place since I'd walked in. And most disconcerting, it looked handwritten, with a regular pen, on yellowed paper. Nothing digital, nothing modern, as if it were an old-fashioned register, or as if modernity didn't exist within it. I pretended to need the bathroom and walked around to where I saw the pad of papers. The locker was open. Inside, stacked in an almost ritualistic manner, were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of files similar to mine. Some had the same notation, resistant behavior. Others had more enigmatic words, initiated, surrendered, voluntary, and some had something more direct and cold, exit denied. That term chilled me. It was as if someone had requested permission to leave and been refused, but refused by whom? At the bottom of the drawer, I found something even stranger, a worn leather notebook with a rusty button closure. It didn't seem to fit the style of the place. It was out of place, too old even for that. Deliberately retro motel. Inside were dated entries, 1961, 1957, 1983, and the strangest thing, some names crossed out forcefully, almost angrily, and notes written in shaky handwriting. Chose to forget, couldn't resist comfort, preferred comfort to reality. It was like an employee's diary, or perhaps someone like me, who tried to understand what was behind the scenes. And then a folded page, held together with a loose staple, almost fell from my hands. When I opened it, it read, "The motel doesn't hold you. It offers. It's you who accepts." That sentence pierced like a knife. The idea that I wasn't there against my will, but by some silent, unconscious choice, was desperate. At some point, without realizing it, had I longed for this. A place where everything was clean, predictable, without external pressures, obligations, or deadlines. A space where time stands still, where no one demands anything of you, where you wake up with the bed made and the TV plays the same. Comforting movies. I began to rethink the small details that had seduced me, the scent of the pillow, the perfect temperature of the room, the feeling of being taken care of before I even asked, the fact that I didn't have to make decisions or explain anything to anyone. The extreme comfort felt like a subtle trap. And what about the other guests? Were they all there for the same reason? Could it be that on some level they all wanted to forget the world, escape the pain, be cared for without having to give anything in return? As I quietly left the office, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Stares. Not from the clerk, who was still smiling, but from someone at the top of the stairs. A woman, her hair tied in a low bun, a light dress, a blank expression. She said nothing. She just stared at me, and when I blinked, she was gone. I heard no footsteps, nothing, just the echo of a silence that seemed to carry memories of everyone who had ever passed through there. I returned to my room with the diary hidden under my shirt. On the way, I passed a lady who offered me a sweet. "You'd better accept it, dear. Here, what you refuse stays." Her tone was soft, but her gaze was serious. Again, that feeling that everyone there knew more than they were letting on, and that the danger wasn't the place itself, but how much it gave you exactly what you always wanted, even if you never had the courage to admit it. Lying in bed, I opened the diary once more and read a nearly illegible entry. "The more you want to stay, the harder it is to remember why you wanted to leave." The words began to blur together. My name, my city, my job, all of it seemed distant, irrelevant. The hidden truth about the motel wasn't about physical imprisonment. It was about the surrender of the soul, a prison made of comfort, emotional amnesia, and impeccable smiles. A cage without bars, built with everything that seems harmless, and therefore so dangerous. The old man didn't insist. He just looked at me like someone who'd seen others try and fail. But in that look was a soft, almost extinguished flame, as if for a moment he believed that perhaps things could be different with me. "You need to get out of here, without wanting to leave, and you need to remember what brought you, what you lack." Those were his last words before he walked away toward the empty cafeteria, his footsteps echoing like those of someone who had already given up on leaving, but not on observing those who were still trying. I went upstairs without saying a word to anyone. For the first time, I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't look out the window, I didn't lie down. I just sat on the floor, in the darkest corner of room 3, with the lights off. And I tried to silence everything, not my thoughts, those were pulsing, but rather that part of me that just wanted to understand. Because at that moment, understanding didn't help me. Wanting to leave, much less. I needed to feel, and that was it. So I let the images come. I saw myself returning from a meeting that meant nothing, a boss I never respected, a position that gave me status but took away my health. I saw myself laughing in photos I no longer remember why they were taken. I saw myself accepting crumbs of a life that seemed good, but was just a construction. I remembered the last time I truly cried, not from the pain, but from the realization that I was completely alone. And in that moment, in that oppressive silence, the motel so zealously maintained, something snapped inside me. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought with unmistakable clarity, I don't belong here. And it's not because I want to escape it, it's because I no longer belong to what brought me here. The next morning, before 11:11, I got out of bed. I looked at the room key on the dresser and didn't touch it. I left with only what I had on me, nothing else. No cell phone, no wallet, not the old watch I insisted on keeping, even though time stood still. Nothing. I didn't need any of where I was going, or trying to go. I walked through the quiet hallway. The clerk was at the counter, as always, smiling too much. But this time, his smile didn't meet mine. He didn't say, "Good morning," and I didn't respond. It was as if, for the first time, he knew something was off script. The glass door of the retro Sunset Inn opened with a discreet hiss, and I stepped onto the hot asphalt with a strange lightness in my shoulders. No cars, no breeze, just the sun too high. For that time of day, and the road, that same endless straight line that so often brought me back to the beginning. But this time I went, one step, then another. I didn't look back. With every meter I left the motel behind, it felt like an invisible layer was peeling away. The sound of my own footsteps became clearer, the air more real. Even the heat on my skin felt new, alive. I walked until the retro Sunset Inn sign disappeared behind me, and I kept going, even though I didn't know where. The road ended. I wasn't running away. It wasn't an attempt. It was a surrender. I walked like someone accepting the void, like someone reconnecting with what was before the distractions, before the numbing comfort, before the oblivion. And then I saw it, a dot on the horizon, a white light, which didn't blink, didn't vibrate. It just remained there, fixed, as if it had always been there. And the closer I got, the more I felt everything around me lose weight. The trees along the road no longer cast shadows. The ground no longer creaked beneath my feet. Time no longer followed me. Just a few meters from reaching the light, I felt no fear. I felt peace. I felt truth. As if I were entering a place where nothing could be hidden. No memories, no regrets, not even the lies I'd told myself throughout my life. It was a surrender, yes, but not to the motel, to who I truly was. And then, as I took the last step, there was no flash, no sound, no explosion of senses, just darkness, as if I had crossed a threshold where eyes no longer mattered. And in that darkness, something pulsed, an almost organic sound, as if the world was still being stitched together around me. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. I don't know how long I walked that road. My bare feet seemed to float above the warm asphalt, and for some reason, they didn't hurt. I didn't feel cold, nor hot, nor tired. Just a strange lightness, as if I had left behind. Not just my physical baggage, but an invisible burden that had been with me for years. My mind was clear, for the first time in a long time, without the constant buzz of commitments, goals, demands. I just repeated to myself, my name is Michael Harper. I am a man. I have a story. I exist. And then the light came, dim, flickering, A silhouette formed on the horizon, and for a moment I thought it was the motel sign again. But it wasn't. It was different. A softer, almost organic glow, as if the air itself were pulsing. I approached cautiously with no thought of turning back. This time I didn't want to go back. I wanted to cross, and that's what I did. One step after another, until the darkness enveloped me completely. The next thing I remember was the sound of tires on asphalt, my fingers on the steering wheel, the roar of the engine, the road before me, straight, ordinary, illuminated by the late afternoon sun. I was driving, but I didn't know where I was coming from, or where I was going. There was no GPS signal, no apps open, nothing in the glove compartment, no briefcase, no meeting planner, no luggage in the back seat, just me, alone. I saw a sign for a nearby town. I didn't recognize the name. It seemed small and welcoming, with a gas station, a grocery store, and a roadside diner. I decided to stop. Maybe a coffee would help me clear my head. The bell on the door jingled as I entered, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee hit me like an old memory. The people, they seemed normal. A couple chatting at one of the tables, a man in a cap reading the newspaper at the counter, a young, smiling waitress who greeted me with an automatic, "Good morning." I sat by the window and ordered a black coffee. I looked around, trying to find any clue that would tell me where I was, or rather, who I was. In the corner of the room, an oval mirror adorned the wall above a sideboard with cutlery and napkins. As I waited, I glanced up at it, perhaps reflexively. That's when my stomach sank. In the reflection, there was something behind me, a dark blur, a hazy shape, a familiar outline. No, it couldn't be. I slowly turned my head, staring at the nothingness behind me. There was only a wall and an artificial plant next to the water fountain, but in the mirror, the stain was still there, and in the center of it, the logo. That same pink neon logo, that damned setting sun framed by curved palm trees. Retro Sunset Inn. My heart raced. I stared at the cup in front of me. My fingers trembled. I lifted the coffee to my lips, trying to mask my panic. But the taste wasn't coffee. It was sweet, too hot, too familiar. It was the same flavor as the tea served in room 3, the same vanilla and anise scent that perfumed the perfectly stretched sheets, the same taste I swore I'd never taste again. I looked around, searching for a way out. The door seemed far away. People continued their conversations, as if nothing was out of place, as if I wasn't about to crumble. Inside, as if time, once again, had decided to swallow me, I stood up suddenly. I crossed the room with quick steps. I pushed open the bathroom door. The fluorescent light flickered on. The sink was wet. The mirror was foggy. I splashed water on my face, took a deep breath, and when I finally looked at my reflection, I didn't recognize myself. The man in the mirror had my face, yes, but something was different. His eyes no longer held the weight of doubt. They seemed calm, as if they had accepted something, as if they knew a truth I refused to remember. That's when I heard the voice, whispered, gentle, coming from somewhere behind me, or maybe from inside my head. "Michael, your room is ready." There was no echo. There was no rush. Just that gentle certainty, like an ancient invitation I'd accepted before I even knew it existed. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, the reflection was still there. But behind me, in the glass, something new appeared. The pink frame of a dressing room mirror, a switched-off light switch, beige curtains with a geometric pattern, the brown carpet, room 3, Retro Sunset Inn. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a question that began to hammer inside me from that moment. What if all that, the detour, the motel, the stop time, the smiling guests, the lying reflections, were not just a physical place, but a symbolic representation of something we carry inside? What if each of us had our own Retro Sunset Inn? A mental space where everything seems welcoming, comfortable, where nothing hurts, but where nothing evolves either. Where routine anesthetizes us, memory weakens, and little by little we forget who we were, why we began our journey, what choices brought us here, and worse, we accept it, settled, connecting our identity not with who we really are, but with the made bed, the familiar scent, the gentle voice telling us our room is ready. I've been there, and, in a way, maybe, I still am. And maybe that's why, to this day, every time I see a mirror in a new place, I pause for a second before looking into it. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because, deep down, I suspect that I might not really be here, or rather, that I'm still there. And don't think this is just paranoia, because there are nights when the car radio automatically tunes to a station I don't remember saving, and it plays that same slow song that played in the lobby. Sometimes, in the wee hours of the morning, I wake to the smell of anise in my room, faint, almost imperceptible, but it's there, just like that pattern in the back of my memory, palm trees against an eternal sunset. I even looked for the motel again. I wanted to see if anyone else knew about it, if there were any records, and I found nothing, not on Google Maps, not in the local newspapers, not in forums about abandoned places. No photos, no mention, just similar stories. People who say they were lost for hours, or even days, and then simply returned. But something about them had changed. The way they looked, the way they spoke, the way they disconnected from what they once were. And when these people try to tell what happened, no one believes them. Because the world out there demands logic, demands coherence, demands linear time. And the truth is, there are places where none of that applies, where time doesn't move, where the past mixes with desire and regret, where comfort is a trap disguised as choice. And that's what makes me most uneasy. The retro Sunset Inn never held me captive. It only offered me relief. It gave me the exact kind of silence I secretly craved. The kind of oblivion I'd never admitted wanting, and that's why I almost stayed. Almost. Because escaping required something I no longer knew I had. A pure memory, an intact recollection of who I was before everything. Before the exhaustion, before the renunciations, before the slow surrender that sometimes disguises itself as routine. But let me tell you a detail that I have never revealed to anyone. A week after all this happened, I received an envelope at home with no return address. Inside was just an old key, one of those heavy iron ones. Attached to a worn leather keychain, it bore the number 3, and on the back, engraved in low relief, was the inscription, "Coming back is a choice. Staying is natural." To this day, I keep that key in the bottom drawer of my office. I've never told my wife or my friends. And whenever I think about throwing it away, something stops me. I don't know if it's attachment or fear, but maybe, just maybe, a part of me still wishes I had the option to go back, to walk into that room, sit on that bed, and forget again. Because deep down, everyone has a place where they hide from their own story, an inner space where decisions don't need to be made, where pain doesn't require healing, only anesthesia, where time doesn't take its toll, it only lulls, and where the only voice you hear is the one that says, "Your room is ready." If you've made it this far, it's because you felt it too, that strange desire to disappear for a few days or for a lifetime, that urge to take a detour, even knowing it leads nowhere, only deeper into yourself, and yet we go. And if you've stuck with me this far, I can only imagine this story has gripped you somehow. Maybe not because of the scares or the mysteries, but because of something deeper, that echo that beats inside when we see ourselves, even if distortedly, in every choice, in every silence, in every room we've avoided entering our own minds. If at any point during this journey you felt like you weren't just hearing a story, but living a piece of it, then it makes sense for us to continue. Click here to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next stories that, like this one, talk less about ghosts and more about what we keep hidden when no one's looking. And if you made it to the and leave a comment below. I'm with you until the end. So I know you also walked this road with me. Oh, and if you found this trip intense in any way, leave a like. Not for the video, but for the connection, because there are stories that deserve to continue being told, and others that we'll still discover together.